Hello and welcome to the PCOS Diva podcast. My name is Amy Medling. I'm a certified health coach and I'm the founder of PCOS Diva. And my mission is to help women with PCOS find the tools and knowledge they need to take control of their PCOS so they can regain their fertility, femininity, health, and happiness. This podcast is sponsored by my new book, Healing PCOS, a 21-day plan that takes you step by step through healing and thriving with PCOS. It's all in there waiting for you, beginning with the 3 keys to living your best life as a PCOS diva. For more details, visit healingpcos.com. So I often talk about the blessings of PCOS, and one of the blessings that I've experienced is that I've been able to meet some amazing women on my journey with PCOS, and my podcast guest today is one of them. And I'm just so happy to have Dr. Fiona McCullouch back on the podcast. And she is a board-certified naturopathic doctor, and she's the founder and owner of White Lotus Integrative Medicine. She's worked with thousands of people seeking better health over the past 18 years of her practice. She is the author of one of my favorite books on PCOS, The 8 Steps to Reverse Your PCOS. And she has been a very popular contributor to PCOS Diva with guest posts and podcasts over the years. In fact, when I was preparing for this podcast, I realized that she was just the second interview that I did when I kind of launched my interview series back in 2013. So I'm just so thrilled to have her back on and to be chatting with her this morning. Welcome.
Thank you, Amy. I have really enjoyed just interacting with you over so many years. And even before that podcast, I had no idea that was one of your first ones because I'd been following you for so long. And I just love your book. And it's just been cool to kind of go through this journey, together and really see so many things change for women out there.
Yeah, and you know what's neat too is like getting to know you and your family, and you're seeing your 3 boys grow up, and seeing them blossom and flourish, and that's really a cool part of this too.
Oh, I know, and same for yours. I mean, I just saw all the amazing, footage of your son graduating, and it's just amazing to see, how quickly they grow up and how well he's doing. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, and we're both women with PCOS, and we're really here to tell you that you can thrive, and you can have children. If doctors have told you, I know they did in the past for me, that they'd have to jump through hoops one day, and here my baby's going to be turning 18 and going off to college. So there is so much hope.
There is, absolutely. Yeah, I really feel like most women with PCOS do have children. It's really awful that they're often told that that's not a possibility because, we see again and again, it's very possible.
So you are, and I know because you're one of my go-to experts when some new research comes out and I need to sort of make heads or tails of it. And, I reach out to you because you really are an avid researcher, and you've published articles in major naturopathic journals, and your book is so research driven. And so I thought it would just be a great opportunity today to kind of catch up on some of the latest research, and you can kind of give us your assessment, and we can, and I'd like to ask you some questions too. But I thought I would just sort of hand the mic over to you, and you can kind of get us up to date with some of the latest PCOS research out there.
Sure. And, I'm like such a nerd. I love reading research. It's one of the things I do every day is go through my feeds of all the new studies that have come out. So there's so many new things to share, and there's always, new things like every week, actually. So it's very, very interesting. I think one of the ones that's the big one that a lot of people have been asking about is the study on anti-müllerian hormone in pregnancy. So there was the study that came out which basically found that, they looked at rats actually, and they gave the rats a hormone called anti-müllerian hormone, which we know is often quite high in women with PCOS. And what they found was that the offspring rats actually developed PCOS because of the effects of this hormone on the brain. And they also found that women who have PCOS have higher than average levels of anti-müllerian hormone in pregnancy. And so this is something that makes a lot of sense. But then they went on to conclude that this is the single cause of PCOS, which caused a very big kind of uproar in our community. The suggestion as well at the end of the study was that, giving a medication like cetrotellix, which is basically a fertility drug, would reverse PCOS entirely. Which obviously sounds very exciting, but also there were quite a few concerns with this being, a little bit oversimplifying of this complicated condition.
Yeah, I know a lot of the headlines were saying that a cure has been founded for PCOS and really celebrating that. And it really does women a disservice because now they're ready for that magic pill. So give me the pill that's going to make my PCOS go away.
Exactly, right. And then the other thing that was found about, in the study was that this correlation only held true for the lean women, and also that, the AMH didn't induce any of the insulin resistance that we see in PCOS. So this is part of, it's showing us basically the ovulatory problem, but not the rest of the condition. So it's oversimplifying PCOS as a fertility condition again, which I'm always so against because it's really so much more than that. And we know that once women go through menopause, when ovulation is not an issue, they still have issues. We know there's the cardiovascular risks, the diabetes, the inflammation. So this didn't answer any of those elements of the condition. And if a cure for PCOS was defined as just regular ovulation, that really does not cure this condition. We know that there's lots and lots of women who have so much difficulty with weight loss. They end up getting diabetes. They have inflammation and cardiovascular disease. That is so important. I mean, ovulation is one part of it. We can induce ovulation very easily with medication or with other, natural methods as well. But still, that other element is very, very important for our health. In fact, I would say much more important.
Yeah, and I know one of my other podcast guests from way back when was Dr. Andrea Deneef, and she has sort of led an effort to change the name of PCOS to one of the suggested names, and I think it's a good name, metabolic reproductive disorder, because it does add that metabolic piece to PCOS, although I don't know if we necessarily need to change the name of PCOS, but I do think what you're saying is to emphasize that there is a metabolic component of PCOS.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we even see that in children who go on to develop PCOS later. They have lower levels of hormones like adiponectin, which are really associated just with the metabolic elements. So It's really not just as simple as an ovulation condition. So it's a very interesting study in that it shows us that the prenatal environment does really influence, our outcomes. And we know that, if you give animals testosterone, for example, the offspring will develop PCOS. Or if you expose them to endocrine disruptors of various types, like bisphenol A that's in plastic bottles, for example, or other types of plastics, that can also induce PCOS in the offspring. So it's really like endocrine disruption in general. The prenatal state disrupts the development of the ovary and its connection to the brain. But it certainly doesn't tell us that there's one specific endocrine disruptor that does that. It's quite a variety of different endocrine disruptors that can induce this effect.
Right. And not every woman with PCOS is going to produce an offspring with PCOS either.
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah, there's families where some children end up having PCOS and then others don't, so there's definitely, complex genetics involved there where
Right.
there's certain genes that might be passed and certain ones that are not. And then there's the environmental turning on and off of the genes, which we call epigenetics. So there's just so many, it's a really complicated condition. And I think the more that we learn about it and discover, the more we realize it's very multifactorial. So there is no one cause or one cure. I think that we're actually seeing that's actually not the case.
Right, and that's a huge takeaway, that it is such a complex condition. And I've got to give a shout out to advocates for PCOS that are really raising awareness to gain more research dollars to put behind PCOS, because I shared that I was in Washington, D.C. for PCOS Advocacy Day, and that was really a main thrust of why we were there, to try to get more funding for PCOS research dollars, because right now the National Institutes of Health, their research budget, there's only 0.01% advocated towards PCOS research. And that's a problem when now the statistics are as high as 1 in 5 women have PCOS. So it's really important, if you're listening and you want to make a difference and to get more research done so that we can kind of figure out what's going on with PCOS and this complex disorder, that join organizations like PCOS Challenge and contact your representatives in Congress and the Senate and ask them to, fund more, allocate more funding for PCOS research. So that was just my little plug.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, I didn't know that little, I knew it was a very small amount, but I didn't know it was quite that small, so it's fantastic that this advocacy, it's very needed. It's a huge problem. I mean, we think about cardiovascular disease as the number one cause of death in women. And a lot of us are, we feel like, oh, we're too young for that, but the cardiovascular disease, all of these problems accumulate over time. So it's happening in our bodies now. So the more that we can learn about how to reverse and prevent these problems from happening, it's going to be beneficial for us, but also for our children. So it's so, so important. It's just so many women are affected by this. And from what I can see, it seems like it's on the rise.
Yeah, I think so too. And speaking of the cardiovascular risks, when I'm doing kind of like just little updates, looking on PubMed or Google Scholar about PCOS research, it seems like a lot of research is directed at the cardiovascular risks. And I know that there was a new study that just came out a little while ago saying how, and we already kind of know this, but it's just reaffirming that women with PCOS are at risk for cardiovascular events.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we see all of the risk markers are elevated ahead of time. So HSCRP is a blood test that it's an inflammation marker, but lots of women have high levels of this, and that chronic inflammation really does increase that risk. So it's great that there is research being directed at that now. So I'm really hopeful for the future, and that we're going to be able to figure out a lot more about what's been going on with this condition.
Yeah, so inflammation does play such a significant role. Is there more studies that you've seen that sort of ties inflammation to risk factors of PCOS?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I thought that I've been finding really interesting, just that I've been researching lately, is about mood and inflammation. And we know that women with PCOS, it's very consistent that we see in all the studies that we're at higher risks for depression and anxiety and other mood disorders of various types. And this actually seems to hold true outside of, some of the stressful kinds of elements of PCOS. So there's obviously, like, if you have infertility, that's very stressful. If you have hirsutism, like hair growth where you don't want it, that's stressful. Hair loss is stressful. Acne is stressful. But even outside of those, we see an increase in depression and anxiety. And so it's been, what's causing that? Like, is it the hormone imbalances or what, right? But so a study actually came out just today that I was reading about insulin resistance and the risk of depression. And it's basically showing that the more insulin resistant women are, the more the depression seems to go up. And it seems to go up by 2.3-fold, which is a huge increase. And we know that insulin resistance is related very much with chronic low-grade inflammation. Some of the interesting research I've been reading, there's a researcher's name is Dr. Charles Raison, and he's done a lot of research on depression and the immune system and the brain and how that works. So what he's found is that there's a reason that we have depression in the face of inflammation. So if you think about how, most of the risks for survival in our past before we had our Western society as it is here would be from dying either from an infection or from an injury. And so say, for example, you had a really bad viral infection, that's a pretty serious risk for life before we had hospitals and medicine to help us survive these things. So the body's mechanism for protecting yourself during those really, inflammatory conditions, because those are inflammatory, is basically to go into your cave or your house and stay there until you get better rather than going out. You don't want to be going out finding food or mating or anything else because you'll probably be eaten because you're weakened. So basically the body's mechanism for self-protection is to go inside and, heal and get better. So that's inflammation. It does cause that in our brain, which looks a lot like depression. So if you're sick with a flu, you're going to be lying in bed all day. You're not going to be going out. That's normal. We don't call that depression. But if you're like, if you acted like that every day, that would be then considered to be depression. So what they find as well is when they inject animals with inflammatory cytokines, which are the same kind that we have with PCOS, the chronic low-grade inflammation, the rats actually start to become depressed. And they'll go into their little burrow and they'll just sit there and be very quiet. And when they take away those inflammatory cytokines, the rats actually stop being depressed again. So it's quite interesting in that this chronic low-grade inflammation is really related to our mood, and that, trickles down into so many things. So outside of even cardiovascular risk, depression, anxiety, this is all really associated to the inflammation that we all have.
Yeah, well, I know from a personal perspective, when I'm fall back on sort of the SAD diet.
Yeah.
That standard American diet. I find,
acronym.
Yeah, I know, because it really does make me sad. And I find myself just wanting to curl up on the sofa, like with the shades closed and watch, I don't know, the period films that I like.
Right?
Yeah, Downton Abbey, I don't know, just escape from it all and not engage. And it's funny because now my husband and I have been married now we're going on 22 years. So he knows me, and he'll usually say, I like kind of force me to get to the gym to kind of get those endorphins going, or say, what did you eat today, or what have you been eating? Because I honestly can track it back to foods that are inflammatory to me, like gluten and sugar. And it really affects my mood. And I think it's so satisfying to hear this research, to realize that I kind of figured out what was going on in myself just by listening to my body. I didn't need the research, but it's great to hear it to kind of back it up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, it makes a lot of sense, given that our bodies are made to really survive. And this is the only time that we haven't had these kinds of threats against our life, in society pretty much ever. And it's so true. Like, I know if I feel, if I tend to eat outside of what I know I should be eating, I also tend to feel more down, and maybe like watching too many episodes of, I don't know if you watched The Crown on Netflix.
Oh, yeah, of course.
watch those over and over. But it's so true. It's like you want to just kind of curl up and be away from everything. And the other interesting thing that this researcher was looking at, he was actually looking at something called hyperthermia, which I just thought I'd bring up because it's something that's so easy to do. And it kind of answers some of these questions about why exercise really improves our mood so much. So what he found was that when you raise the body temperature, it almost induces, like, your brain thinks it's like a fever and that you've fought whatever this inflammatory infection is, and it induces anti-inflammatory responses in the body. And so this is why this is actually part of the biggest reason they feel that exercise seems to be an antidepressant, because you're raising your core body temperature for a certain period of time.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. Wow,
Yeah.
I would not have thought of that. That's so interesting.
Yeah, and they were able to induce the same exact benefit by putting, for example, in what they would call a hot box, like a sauna, but raising the core body temperature would also induce these same anti-inflammatory mechanisms in the body, and people would feel, they do feel significant relief from depression as a result of that. So,
yeah, have you ever done Bikram yoga?
I have.
And you really do feel fabulous when you get out of there, don't you? I mean, it's a lot. It's a big commitment. I was talking to my girlfriend about it because it's a 90-minute class and it's downtown here. So it takes me about 15, 20 minutes to get there and get home. And then you definitely need a shower after. So it's like it's a big commitment to go, but you really feel wonderful.
Yeah, for anyone with mood disorders, I would highly recommend it, because it more than even, any other kind of exercise, it's the heat, I think, that has, especially after reading this research, or even a sauna can be really helpful for the same reason, and I think there's a lot of history of using saunas in Europe for so many disorders, but now we're kind of finding out why. It has a lot of anti-inflammatory effects on our body, and probably coming from that where when our body temperature is raised, that's what we do to fight an infection, but we're not getting out of that state. We're just inflamed all the time. So it kind of turns that on in our body.
There was a study that came out about a month or so ago, because I posted it on Facebook, and it was about how hot tubs were, like, soaking in a hot tub was really beneficial for women with PCOS. Do you remember seeing that?
I did, and I was so interested in that because I have a hot tub, and I got that mostly because I like it, but at the same time now I'm like, great, it's got actual benefits, but I really think it's the same mechanism. I don't think it matters in a way how you raise that temperature,
right?
And just that it happens somehow, and all of these methods are really beneficial.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you could give listeners some tips, like if they feel like they may be in this inflammatory state, depressed moods, and sometimes you can just feel the inflammation, you're puffy, bloated, achy joints. What would you recommend to help, kind of things that we can do to quell the inflammation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for the first thing is diet, really, getting rid of some of the anti-inflammatory foods. So sugar, and we were talking about the sugar, dairy, and, you don't have to be perfect, but at least, try to cut it back to some degree. Gluten. And also anything that makes you feel not great. So if you eat something and you kind of feel like, oh, I ate that and I feel really, bummed out for like 3 to 4 hours, there's probably something in there that's inflammatory that you're not responding well to, because everyone is a bit different. Some people, there are foods that other people are fine with, but they react to. So listen to your body and just like take note when you eat, what is it that you ate today if you're really feeling down or inflamed. So working on those types of things. Keeping your blood sugar really stable is really important too. So making sure you have enough healthy fats, proteins, lots of fiber with every meal, and enough carbs that you're not, going into a more stressful type of situation. That really depends on each person, how much they need. And then, there are anti-inflammatory supplements that are really kind of cornerstones just to take that down some notches. And we know that things like fish oil, omega-3 fatty acids are pretty, we have really good evidence that they're anti-inflammatory. We see benefits for mood, for cardiovascular disease. So those are all really through that same pathway of those being anti-inflammatory. N-acetylcysteine is a really good antioxidant that is anti-inflammatory. And a recent study came out that showed us even, I think, a couple weeks ago that people who have abdominal fat, so basically insulin-resistant people, like for example, most women with PCOS, myself included, have lower levels of selenium. And that actually is because it's being used up more by, the inflammatory process, because selenium is used to quench oxidative stress, which is, what makes inflammation what it is. So, those supplements can really help. And then, of course, all those, looking at things like exercise and just knowing the mechanism by how that works. It's actually a very physical mechanism. Or trying some things like a sauna or hot yoga. If you do all of those things together, most people would really be able to reduce their inflammation quite a bit.
Yeah, and you can feel better fairly quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I do want to ask you a question that I get a lot, and I know that there's been some research out there recently about bariatric surgery and PCOS. Women want to know, is that going to help my PCOS? Is it worthwhile to look into? I'd love to get your thoughts and how you might counsel a patient that comes to you asking about bariatric surgery.
Yeah, I do have quite a few patients who've had this done. And I think my views on it are kind of that it does have significant side effects and risks. And so it will change your life forever in ways that are both possibly beneficial and also not. And so I always recommend to try everything else first because of those long-term effects, because it's a surgery, you can't undo that. So if there's some way that you can manage your symptoms without having a surgery like this, it's always better to do that. However, there are some women for whom they have tried absolutely everything and it's not working, and the benefit of it might be better than the risk, in which case I would say find a very good surgeon and get everything and just make sure you really understand the whole process. It can really change what you're able to eat, not only the amount, but what you can eat, how much you can eat at a time, and it might change a lot of your bowel movements might be different actually for the rest of your life. So I've seen people have had this and they do have to do a lot of management of it ongoing. But, it really, I think it's a very individual type of decision, and definitely not something that's going to work for the vast majority because it is such an intense intervention.
Yeah, and there's other ways to reduce your androgens and regain menstrual cycles and, and improve your metabolic outcomes.
Yes, there are many, many options these days. So it's just, there's so much you can do. There's so much that we've learned. And the vast majority of women do very, very well with the lifestyle interventions once they know exactly what to do for PCOS specifically, because there's just so many diets out there that don't necessarily work well for PCOS. They might work for other people, but you'll see a lot of women saying, well, I tried all these things that other people are trying and, they're not working for me. It's really because the programs themselves are not really designed for the severe insulin resistance that we see in PCOS.
Right. Well, I want to just ask you where women can find out more information, because we're kind of running out of time. And I also just want to give another shout out to your book, The 8 Steps to Reverse Your PCOS. And what I love about your book, and I think we have a whole podcast where we talk about it, but I love how you've broken down PCOS into the different phenotypes. And I just thought, if somebody's not familiar with your book, maybe you could just give a quick overview about what that's all about.
Yeah, sure. So my book is, it's basically a mini-encyclopedia on PCOS. So it goes through all of the different elements of PCOS that are involved. And these elements can actually change throughout a woman's lifespan. Mm-hmm. So at certain points in time, she might be dealing with way more androgens, especially when she's younger. And at other points of time, maybe not so much. So it goes through all of the different key elements so that women really understand what are the factors that make up PCOS, and then how to expect those to change at different times, as well as different things you can do at the different times of your life that are impacted by the condition, because it's something that really evolves from childhood all the way through past menopause.
Yeah, and a hysterectomy isn't going to cure you.
No, absolutely, it will not. Yeah. We know that that's the case. I actually have a lot of postmenopausal women as patients who have PCOS, and they still have the same problems. They don't have periods anymore, so you can't see that, but the insulin resistance is all still there, the inflammation. So yeah, it's absolutely not going to be cured by hysterectomy.
Yeah. Well, I love the work that you've done and the contribution that you've made to the PCOS community. As I said in the opening, you really have been a blessing to me, just personally and professionally. And I just want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much, Amy. I just want to say the same to you. You're such a tireless advocate and helper, and you always have so much wisdom to share. And I think, I just feel so lucky to have met you and to be able to work with you.
Oh, well, and I'm looking forward to seeing you this summer, hopefully, at the conference we go to every year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will be there.
Yay. So how can people learn more about your work?
Yeah, so you can just check out my website. It's at drfionand.com. And if anyone's in Toronto, I have a clinic at whitelotusclinic.ca that you can check out. We treat lots and lots of women with PCOS there.
Now, do you do like Skype consults or?
Right now we don't.
Okay.
We used to do that, but now our regulations have made it such that we don't do that anymore. However, if people are interested, they can give our clinic a call, because sometimes that might change, or there might be ways that we can accommodate distance patients if they are to fly up. So yeah, just let us know or reach out to us. My clinic's email is info@whitelotusclinic.ca.
Oh, excellent. Well, thanks for taking time to come on to the podcast and sort of share some of the recent research. Maybe we can make this a regular appearance, every 6 months or so. You can share the latest with us.
Sure, I would love to. I just love geeking out on research, so I'm happy to do that anytime.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm in the show notes, I'm going to point to your article about AMH that you wrote and that recent study that you mentioned, and I'll also link to our previous podcasts so people can listen in.
Oh, thank you so much, Amy.
Well, and thank you everyone for listening. I look forward to being with you again soon. Thanks for joining us today. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast and learned a little something that can help you along in your journey. For more information about PCOS and PCOS Diva products and programs, visit PCOSdiva.com. This podcast was sponsored by my new book, Healing PCOS. It's my proven 21-day diet and lifestyle plan to help women with PCOS take back control of their health and resolve their symptoms. Healing PCOS offers you daily, small, manageable steps that help alleviate symptoms and control the inflammation, hormonal imbalance, and insulin resistance that underlie PCOS. The 21-day plan consists of a 21-day anti-inflammatory hormone balancing meal plan, including meal prep and plan ahead tips to make eating like a PCOS diva sustainable, 85 delicious recipes, daily lessons, and self-care exercises. I have helped tens of thousands of women with PCOS take back control over their health and their lives through lasting healing and sustainable lifestyle change. So whether you're newly diagnosed or have struggled a lifetime with PCOS, this book is for you. Find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or anywhere books are sold.